a friendly introduction. We'll save the unfriendly one for later. But so, like I said earlier, kind of been a developer for the last 11 years. For the last 6, I've like really heavily focused on React and JavaScript. And so, like React when in the 0 dot days, when it basically would hard crash with really cryptic error messages about invariant problems. And you would like wonder what in the world happened, or because everyone was kind of new to React. You would fall into these like render cycles where you were updating state in the render function and consuming it there as well, and it would just basically crash your whole computer, run out of memory, and your computer would crash. So React has come a long way, just like Nashville, and it's in a much better place. But that's kind of when I got my start real seriously with JavaScript. And I'm really proud that I'm appropriate to this group. I know that we don't meet in the bistro anymore, but like to call it my ex-Emma mafia status. I know a few others here and probably listening are ex-Emma as well. And then a bunch of question marks because I didn't know what to put on this slide.
Yeah, but you just had to fill out the bullet list there to make it symmetrical with your picture, though, right? That's what you did.
That's exactly right. That's why I did it. I was like, I need these things. And look, and it's still probably like a.
Yeah, I think you can put one more. I think one more bullet, you would have been good.
Oh man. So what I'd like to discuss today and get into is like what Prisma is, and like to keep true to the friendly conversation. And I'll talk about this more. There's some really incredible things that Prisma does. It's a lot of different things, and it does a lot of different things. There's a lot of ground to cover. It's a data modeling tool. It can be a GUI for your database. It's an ORM. It's potentially, it is a migration and data storage lifecycle tool. And it's basically amazing. It's really, really cool. However, because there's literally so many things it does, and there's so many things you can do with it. And Prisma has, I've probably read 1,000th of percentage of if that's the way percentages work, which it's not, of the documentation. And the reality is I just can't cover everything. And so I thought, and I totally didn't make my slides this morning. And I figured like, what was the best talk to give around Prisma? And I, kind of true to the title, a friendly introduction, a general overview, and maybe a little bit of code around the query engine, I think would do it. And if there was interest, perhaps a presentation later in the future about more complex or deeper subjects. And, this talk could be really fast or it could be really slow. I'm not really sure where we're going to end up at, so just bear with me. And there is a portion where I'm going to try to do some live coding, which is fraught with perils, as everyone knows. So hopefully that goes well. Yeah, hopefully I haven't made a giant mistake by deciding to do that. But it all begins with Prisma around the Prisma schema. And Prisma schema is kind of like a specialized domain specific language that Prisma uses to define your database structure. And it's really, really cool. And it's really powerful. Now, if you use tools like or code editors like VS Code, they'll come with the ability to install extensions that basically support this specialized DSL. And you get all kinds of great things like, format on save, syntax highlighting, error highlighting, the little squigglies, all that stuff. So it's super cool.
Now, the VS Code plugin is actually really cool. Is like, say, for example, you add and you'll get to this. I'm sorry, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but you added a relationship to one of your models, it'll actually go add that foreign key for you automatically in one of your other models and stuff like that. So it's like really smart. It's kind of amazing.
It is amazing, and it is really smart. And no, I'm glad you called that out. not only does it do that, and Prisma talks about why, because people are like, well, why can't it just be JSON? Like, why do you have to do this specialized DSL? Like, why can't it be any of these other things? Why is it this? And the reason is because of that intelligence that they have, around like, completing both sides of a relationship, but also, and I actually do call this out later, but kind of appropriate now. It enables engine specific language features. So for instance, on this snippet that I totally stole from the Prisma website, the provider at the top, kind of like line number 3 here, is set to Postgres. Well, MySQL doesn't support enums. Postgres does, or sorry, no, MySQL I think does. SQLite doesn't. So you can see down here, you can use those enums, which it's doing with role, on the user object, and it handles all of that for you. Like, it opens up driver specific features, and because they use their own DSL, they can handle the validation and the auto completion and all the things all the complexity that is around that, which is really cool. The other thing that's super nice is it's also a formatter. So like, it's very similar to Go Thumped. Like, you don't get any choice on the way that this file is formatted. It's auto formatted through the extension, which is nice. You get a lot of consistency that way. But so this document does a lot of things. It's basically like the entire genesis of like your Prisma experience. I'm going to go more into it later, but it will do things like generate migrations. So when you first create it, it'll help create your initial data structure, and then when you make alterations to it, it can sort of intelligently look back at the history of migrations and figure out like what columns were added, what models were added, which were removed, and help you work through those and generate auto migrations, which I haven't seen a great solution for in JavaScript personally ever. Like even with like all the popular ODMs and ORMs, I don't think they have great migration support. So you're kind of like left hand jamming your own migration experience. Well, would you say that's accurate?
Yeah, I think. Well, again, with my limited experience with Prisma, I've done it with like a couple of projects. It's been by far the cleanest, most elegant way to do migration so far, especially, and also with the seed engine as well. Like being able to see the database is super slick.
Yeah, that is slick. I didn't go over the seed part, but I'll make a call out to that hopefully like throughout this talk. I'll try to remember. Yeah, but so the number one thing you're going to do with this file after you create it, and it has all of these aspects, and we'll go in when we do the coding session, and we'll like talk about the things more specifically. And some of them are self-explanatory. But you will basically create your first migration, and then you'll use this to iterate on your objects. And the other great thing that it does is it generates type defs. So it intelligently knows how to map all of these objects into the query engine, but not just that, the Prisma typing system, which you can access if you're doing stuff in TypeScript. Prisma is very strongly typed. I highly recommend, kind of to maximize your benefit and your experience with it to leverage TypeScript when using it. And then I have this like quick pro tip. It says it in the docs now, but it didn't like a few months ago, I don't think, or I just didn't see it. But like when you're rapidly developing, make sure, so normally when you migrate, you'll use like npx Prisma migrate dev when you're doing that locally. When you're like rapidly iterating in like the prototype phase, don't use that. Use npx Prisma db push. What happens, and I fell into this trap, is when you do migrations, you create a lot of migration files, and if you're iterating on your data model often, you're going to have like this massive explosion of migrations that becomes kind of a nightmare, especially if you're sharing and collaborating with other people as they're editing the model. And I would say that's maybe a small shortcoming of Prisma is like you have to be careful about concurrent modification or parallel modifications to this file. It's kind of something you want to closely lock down and have one person working at any given time. So that's it for oh, and then the last thing I want to call it, there's a lot going on in this file. And again, we'll expand more as the talk goes on, but you probably gathered, because we're talking about different things, you can use a variety of different database providers. And the schema file does change when you use non-relational. So like Mongo DB, the format changes a bit. So you can use a variety of different drivers or providers. You can also use different generators, though I've never seen that used. But I think the idea here is that you could like not only generate in JavaScript, but maybe you can generate in Go, etc. I don't know. So again, what does the schema give you? Incredible type hinting. And I have kind of a picture I've taken in my VS Code here, where I have a user object from the previous slide. You see that this user has a string, and it's sort of type hinting that to me when I'm making this query here, that is a property that exists on the user object, which is really, really awesome. So you have all this like strongly typed creature comforts available to you as you're interacting with it, which is really cool. Again, migration support. You get access to the entire Prisma ORM, the query engine, which is super powerful. It has a few shortcomings, especially when you're trying to traverse deep relationships. It becomes a little hard to do. And I think, Will, you mentioned other things that you had run into, but there are little edge cases where the ORM kind of trips up, and we'll talk about how you can get out of those, because they have escape hatches built in if you need to get out of the power of the ORM, which I think is really, really awesome. If you can see here in these 3 lines, we immediately connect to the database, establish a connection, access an object, and conduct a query. So like with very little effort, you get automatic connectivity with the Prisma client instance. And I believe it has its like own database pull mechanism and all this really cool stuff to make it like super performant and reliable and like handle all the complexity of those things, which I think is great, because, back in the day, if you wanted to connect to a database, like let's use SQL Alchemy, you had like 10 to 15 lines of code you had to write to do things like to set up a connection pool and all this stuff, just to get your ORM up and running. So they've really streamlined that experience. You get access to a tool they provide called Prisma Studio, which we'll talk about more in a bit. And you get some DB specific functionality, again, enum, like I showed previously with Postgres. So another thing they've recently added to that's super cool is you can like leverage Postgres's sort of more simplistic full text search capabilities. So like you can really dig into some core DB features and leverage those inside of Prisma, which is really awesome. So this is Prisma Studio, which I mentioned a second ago, and it's their GUI that they give you that is generated from your schema and allows you to edit and interact with records in your database. And it's really, really cool. So the best part about this is like it goes beyond your normal sort of standard SQL editor, in that, you can see here, based on my previous model, which has, an auto increment ID, a default value to now for the created at, et cetera, those things pull in and show you in this interface, and you can traverse relationships, create connections between objects, distinct objects, et cetera. So it's a really powerful GUI or interface into your actual DB without having to fire up Postgres and get in, a query builder or use something like Beekeeper and, kind of like do all the SQL mumbo jumbo to do the same thing, which I think is awesome. So already we have to jump into some code. So this is where you all believe in me and give me your strength to hopefully progress through this code example without problems.
You can do it, man. Believe in you.
So on the right, we have a Prisma schema, And
Hey,
again,
do you mind bumping the font up just a smidge? It might be small for folks on the YouTubes.
Absolutely. It's computer's lagging a little bit. Is that better?
Yeah, it's great.
Awesome. Cool. So the right on the right we have here the schema, and on the left we have a little TypeScript app, whatever, to interact with it. And so, like I said before, the schema is kind of like where a lot of the power comes from, and you have a lot of things going on here. And I am spending a lot of time in the schema, but literally, everything else kind of derives from it. So it's like critically important to understand. And so one of the things that Will had mentioned was those relations. And so you can see here, we have two models. We have a user model or tables. You can kind of think as models and tables somewhat synonymous, but this post table has an author, which connects back to a user table and an associated ID. And you can see on the user side, you have post, which is and this probably looks very similar. They heavily borrow from TypeScript syntax in their DSL. You can see it has a collection of post objects that it connects back to. And, it's very easy to add a new model. So like we can create a new model, which is like, I don't know, an editor. The editor is going to have an ID, it'll be an integer, just very similar to what we have above. We set it default value to be auto incrementing. This is one way you can approach it. You can also use a UUID directive to get like your standard UUID strings instead of sequential integers. And then you can do things like, this editor is something that connects to a user and a post, and where you can model things from one side and instantly get it to the other. So like you can, just do something like this and save. And then you can see like Prisma knows that you want to create this connection, and it automatically ties those things together. And so you can very easily set up like a many-to-many relationship here, where, not good talking and coding, but where you have that connection to these two like individual objects. And so it kind of handles all that for you, which is a really nice like creature comfort. So what we're going to do is we're going to set up some queries. So we have this Prisma schema that we've defined. The first thing we need to do is get this zoom bar out of the way. The next thing we need to do is generate our first migration. And so to do that, you just type npx prisma migrate. And I know my console text is probably very small, but I'll speak the commands to you.
I think if you hit Command plus in there, it'll
make it bigger.
Get bigger, maybe, or maybe Command Shift plus.
Oh no, it made everything bigger. Oh, this is fine. Is this better?
That's fine. That's cool. Yeah, it'll work.
Here, wait. Let me see. Console. Oh, here we go. Damn. Did it make it bigger? It did not make it bigger. Oh, wow. Yeah, so first command you're going to run is npx prisma migrate dev. This is going to create your first initial migration. Whenever it does these like, kind of destructive migrations, it will always warn you. And so here it's telling me that I'm going to have these like big changes. Now I don't have anything in this database, so this is totally fine for me. And I'll just hit yes. And it's going to ask a name for your migration. This is our initial, so I'm going to type in it. And that's generated and applied the migration. So on my database, I have that migration. Now, this is the database before I ran it. And when I refresh, you can see now I have these tables that exist with those properties, which is super cool. And then it generates this migration file. So if you go and open up migrations, you can see the SQL that it generates over here. And it does a lot of really powerful stuff for you in the background. Like to do this, all I had to do was write this little bit of Prisma DSL, and as a result, I got basically all of this stuff, which is super awesome. And again, that's going to be driver specific. So if I change this from Postgres to MySQL, it's going to generate the appropriate SQL statements for that DB engine, which is awesome. Cool. So in this environment I have over here on the left, I basically have already created a connection to the Prisma client, which gives me, by result, a connection to the database. And we're going to do a few things. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a user. And one of the awesome things about Prisma is that when you want to do stuff like create a user, you simply just go to the user property on the Prisma client. So it introspects this schema, like I said, and generates all these like objects and type defs that you need to access that functionality. And you can just call create, and then you pass an object, and you anytime you do a mutation with Prisma, you'll almost always pass in data as your, and this is different from like Mongoose, where you just sort of pass in the information directly as a object. So, so it's like one kind of gotcha to be aware of. And so we're going to create this user. We're going
to. I think one reason why they do that is so that when you create the record, you can also select the results that you want to return in a different object. So you can have like an include or a relationship returned back after the fact. So.
Yeah, exactly. So like it has a lot of, I haven't done too much of that personally. But yeah, it has like a ton of power, and that makes a lot of sense. So you can sort of have additional properties like include down here. You can also, in some situations, do a where, when you, for instance, if you're doing like an upsert, which we'll talk about in a bit. But I think this like normalization opens up a lot of consistent functionality to the query engine.
And real quick, do you mind just for folks that are maybe new to using Faker, just kind of quickly explain what Faker's doing for you here?
Yeah, absolutely. So Faker is a tool that generates fake data. And basically what I'm using Faker to do, it's a library. I don't know if you know this, Will, it's actually created by the person who created Nodejitsu, which was like the first container, like node focused deployment platform. It was later bought by Joyent. So basically he created Faker, and essentially what it does is it generates like fake data, and you can kind of tell it like what kind of fake data you want. So for instance, in this line, we're saying, give me a fake email. So it'll create like a actual real, like valid email that's just gibberish, and it randomly creates that information on every call. So it's a great way to generate lots of like fake data that follows a real real production constraint, but is randomized. So you're always getting something a little bit different. So just kind of grabbing in this, so I'm creating this user, grabbing some information from Faker to populate it. And at this point, you're done, right? Like you don't have to .save. There's no .save, no commit. Once you call the create, it executes as a promise and returns the result, which like Will mentioned, this is both like a create and a select. So it's returning the object it's creating back in the DB. And so we can kind of display that result by logging the corresponding user object. Oops. So we're going to run this, and you'll see the output here is the user. So, and this is, again, what Faker does. So you can see we get like a fake email here. I can't believe they're using Yahoo. That's disgusting. But anyway.
It's an actual real email. It'd be funny.
Yeah, it probably is a real. Come on, Oscar22 at yahoo.com. That's someone's email. Sorry, Oscar 22. I didn't know it would do that. And then you have Donna Casson 5. So we have this this object that's created, and kind of I'm going to take a moment here and show you. I'm going to show you the Prisma Studio. So I'm going to fire that up. To fire it up, you just run npx Prisma Studio. It'll fire in a browser. Cool. And you can see it popped up. We're on the user object, and you can see we have a user value here, which is super awesome. And you can add stuff in this interface as well. So, you know, I'm going to add myself. Please don't sign me up for spam lists. And you can save those changes. And now I'm in the database. So actually, if we go back over here and we can do our next query, we can grab like a bunch of users. And to do that, use find many. You don't need to pass it any arguments if you don't want to, but you can do things like include, and we'll talk about those in a moment. But we're going to go ahead and just grab the users that we have. And if I go ahead and run this, you'll see that those users come back. Yeah, so you can see Prisma Studio added me here, and our script created another new user as a result. So that's sort of like your basic querying. Now, one of the great things that you can do, of course, is you can do this thing called an upsert, which I thought is pretty cool. There's a lot of situations where you want to do an upsert. A good example is like, let's say you're using auth0 as your identity system. Your backend is getting these jots or dwits from the front end. You're validating the dwit. You know it's a valid dwit. The audience is right. The issuer is correct. You know it came from auth0. Everything's in the green. They're just not attached to anything. Like they've never logged in before. It's their first login. That's a great use case for an upsert. And so an upsert, basically, you'll have you just sort of call the user object. You call the upsert method. And you have to provide it a couple of different keys. So the first one is your where clause. You have to tell it, so an upsert basically is find or create. So if it finds the person, it updates them. And if it doesn't find them, it will create them. And so in this situation, we're going to try to find a person with an ID. And we'll use this, the first result from our previous query. So it will find someone. And to do the create, you just pass it create, and to do the update, you just pass it the update. And so here we're going to change that first returned user's name to different value. Now I'm getting a squiggle. 1 second. Update does not exist on type. What have I done wrong? Where create? Oh. Yeah, we're gonna have to pass in some values here. So you have to, because it's strongly typed, you know, if it doesn't find it, it needs those properties as well. So just pass some big data. Cool. So we're gonna update that user. Yep, we did. So Oscar went from being, what were they? Donna Casson 5 to Cassie Unich. So you can see that's kind of like a really powerful way. And if we wanted to make sure that like the create ran, you know, we could pass in a different value here and run it, and we'll get a different result. So I think upserts are super, super awesome. And a lot of your traditional ODMs don't have that. So you're like finding the object. If it doesn't exist, then you're doing your create query. So it's really nice that you can kind of merge those things together. Another thing that I want to show is how to do some connectivity, right? So how do you generate queries across relationships? There's a couple of different ways you can do that. And we can actually continue using our upsert query here to do it. So a user, if we look at our model here, a user has posts. And so how do you create and connect a post to a user? One way you can do it is just write in the create query itself. And so you can pass connect. And then at this point, you can just pass the post values. And it will sort of do that for you. One second.
Might be create versus connect.
Oh yeah, thanks. I'm trying to talk and type. Yes, yeah. So you have to pass create and connect is the other one. So I'll show you connect here in a second. So at this point, if I run this, that user will have a post. Now, when they return, and this is that include thing that Will was kind of talking about a moment ago, you'll notice that they don't return with the post results. And so by default, Prisma doesn't sort of like if you came from like active record in Ruby, you're kind of used to like asking for an object and then asking for that objects. It will kind of just give you that information. Prisma just doesn't automatically load and query those additional objects. You have to explicitly say you want them. So in this situation, I would have to pass in an include down here, and I could say posts. At this point, if I ran the query again, it would include post as a return value, and you can kind of see it here. So this is how you connect objects together. It's really nice. It's great to get like kind of one-stop shop, single nested experience to do that. But it's not the only way. Like you can have a situation where a post exists and it doesn't have an attached user, and I'll show you that right now. So we'll have to create a post. Right. And so this post won't have a user attached to it. And we'll see that here when we run that query. You can see the author ID is null. So it has no users. So you couldn't traverse that relationship. What you can do is we can go back and we can update that user. And we can attach them through the connect directive. So we go back to the user and we want to update. So we'll give it a where. I think we have a user. Yeah, we'll just update that user. So we have the user select, and at this point, we want to do the update. So we have to use data to do that, and then this is where you use connect, and you can do connect or create. That's something else you can do. Sorry, you have to pass the right key in. So you can do connect or create like this, and basically do another kind of like upsert kind of situation. So you're looking for the ID. If it doesn't exist, create it. You can also just do a connect, and you kind of tell it how to connect. We want it to connect on ID, and so we'll just pass the post ID in. And at this point, that the user now will have that second post attached to them. And I'll show you that. Yeah, you can see, oh, we need to include it. Yeah, sorry. 1 second. My mouse just got really slow for no reason. I'm not quite sure why. I think I bumped the sensitivity. Yeah. So you'll see that the post is now connected. And so this is how you kind of like connect and traverse relationships. And so like if you want to, including is one way you can query stuff, and it's great. One of the things that I've done a lot, especially when I'm working with Apollo and typed GraphQL, and I want to traverse relationships through the resolver, is you can actually just use a method instead of include. So for instance, you can do, especially if you only want the object. So like, let's say you want to get the user that's logged in. You want to get their posts. You don't care about their user data, but you just want to get their post, and it's like a security feature that you're using, using sort of relationships as your auth, and you want to traverse that relationship to return that data. So to do that, you would do something like findunique, which interestingly enough, this will only let you use values that are declared unique in the schema, which is pretty awesome. So obviously IDs are unique by default. Email is too. If I try to do something like role, it wouldn't work. You can see it gives me a red type error here. So I kind of like that. It's a little protection. But we'll find that user that we got before, and then you can just do .posts. So any relationship that it has attached to it. Now you can only go one layer deep. And again, this is kind of where I think like there's a bit of a shortcoming with Prisma, where they quite haven't cooked up like deeply nested traversals yet, especially when you're doing something like, I want to get, this logged in user, I want to go to their account. I want to get their post for the account. And I want to ensure that like they can only create posts for, like maybe they belong to a lot of accounts, but I want to make sure that the post for the account they're trying to create is one that they belong to. Those kinds of queries get a little finicky inside of Prisma.
So you can do like nested includes, but again, it's a lot of typing, so it can be funky.
Yeah, it gets funky. You can do that. It gets funky pretty quick, but you can't use in that situation, you can get the data, but you can't use the includes as your like filter. So, right, like, well, I don't think you can do like include post and then like post published true, like deeply nested. So you'd have to look at the data in JavaScript and then kind of like take your mutation or action afterwards. Cool. And there's another way you can traverse relationships. So, obviously you can use include and do it in JavaScript. There is like one little hacky way to do it. I've done this a lot, and I don't love it, but it works. So you can sort of abuse a sum and a none directive they give you. So for instance, if you want to only get you only want to get users that have published posts, right? So that's like maybe a query you want to do. You would essentially have to do something like this, where you say where the post sum published true. So that would return like only users with published posts. So you have to kind of do stuff like this to like traverse the object. So I think this is fine, but I think like, like a SQL Alchemy or Active Record like has handled these object traverses a little bit better than Prisma has at this point. But I will say like they're getting a lot of stuff done. They're moving very quickly. And I think they have prioritized like feature parity with like database like capabilities over like, super expressive, like over the top query DSL. So I think that's the trade-off they've made. And I think they've done a good job doing it. So I don't have too many complaints. It's just, that's an area where you can kind of get caught a little bit. And I think you don't shy away from having a transient object that you're interacting with and doing stuff with and kind of checking stuff against before you like do your actual mutation or your final query. So one of the things too I wanted to go into is I kind of want to show the Prisma Studio off a little bit more. So I think this is kind of neat. One of the things you can do in Prisma Studio is you can create connections here too, just like you would use the connect function or in either direction, or the create for relationship. And so like I have a user here, Oscar22, our favorite user. I can sort of just connect them to any one of these posts that got created. just by clicking the object tag here, and then selecting, the posts that they belong to, and saving that. So now, if I was to query Oscar, all 5 posts would show up as a relation for them. So I think that's pretty neat. And you can go throughout, all of the objects you have in your database. Like you can look at posts, etc. And that connection goes both ways. So for instance, I can see on this post that Oscar is the owner. Well, I can change that to Ryan at Macy.dev and then save those changes, which I think is pretty neat. Let me hop back over to my pres. If I can find it. One second.
It's in your browser, the slides there.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it, Will. So one of the things, and I didn't want to try to live code this because then, like you get to see how rusty I am on SQL. And I personally—
That's why you use it ORM, right? You don't have to write SQL.
That's exactly right. That's my thing. I hate writing SQL. I do not enjoy writing SQL statements whatsoever. My first job in like the tech industry was a SQL DBA, and I did a lot of SQL statements, and I just like don't want to do them anymore. But you can break out of— Prisma lets you break out of their query system if you need to make like really complex joins and so on and so forth. You can get out of that. They give you a lot of escape hatches. So this is an example here where you use basically anytime you get out of Prisma, and you want to get into like the actual like subsystem. Normally those methods are prefixed with the dollar sign. So you'll use like $query raw, and you can pass it a template literal, and it will execute that in raw SQL form. Now, obviously, because Prisma is strongly typed, probably next question is like, how in the heck does TypeScript know what object is getting returned? So like if you can generate any query you want, like how can you put that into a typed thing TypeScript understands? And one of the great things about Prisma is that it generates types. Like you can use the types that Prisma uses itself to type check the query syntax that you saw me using a moment ago. You can import that directly from Prisma Client, and you can cast your sort of raw queries to those user types. So in this situation, you can see here, like we have this raw query where we're selecting users, we're casting that, we're inferring it to a collection of user objects that match our schema definition for user. And at that point, you get you're back in the game in terms of like all the niceties around Prisma's strongly typed system. So I thought that was pretty neat. And then one of the other things that's really cool about Prisma is that because of the way it's implemented, it's like really easy to integrate into like a lot of popular frameworks. I've personally used it with Apollo pretty heavily, as well as NextJS, both in generating like static pages. So if you're like, sort of getting your static data, you can do that with Prisma on server side, or in a BFF, like you can use NextJS's like API folder kind of paradigm where it creates those sort of like server side functions that represent endpoints. You can leverage it there pretty easily, as well as like in Apollo. One of the great things you can easily do is like in this situation, obviously, on the right here, they've shown a whole app that's like in one file. That's not how a lot of us build applications normally, but you can stick it in the Apollo context, so that when you're making the query, down here at the bottom, instead of not having anything, you can grab that context and then execute the query and get the information, return it back. And you can even go as far as leveraging Prisma with some TypeScript schema inference tools and actually generate all your type tests automatically. So you're just left sort of creating the queries and mutations yourself.
I'd say Prisma and GraphQL are just a really nice match together. And especially, I'm not sure if you touched it, well, if you're going to touch on this, but they've got a built-in data loader to solve the N+1 problem. That's especially with deeply nested queries with GraphQL, you can be pretty expensive. So they've got a nice resolution for that.
Yeah, I'm glad you called that out, actually. Yeah, I don't talk about it. There's just, as you can imagine, like so much ground to cover because they do so many incredible things, which is why like you're not going to have this like incredibly overly expressive query engine, because that takes a ton of time as well. And they've kind of spread their time. And yeah, they have like a data loader around the N+1 problem. Yeah, they have like all kinds of stuff that they do, and just really make it like an overall really powerful platform. And personally, like any project that I start that I need to interact with the DB, I'm going to use Prisma just because it affords so much capability and power that I'm willing to take a risk on vendor lock-in. And it's not a lot of lock-in, but a little bit of lock-in, and sort of expect that, Prisma as a company is going to continue on and build projects and technologies on top of this. So I feel
hopefully we're architecting our applications enough where the actual database access layer is just one part, and we're using services and repositories in a way that you can swap out your database vendor pretty easily, hopefully.
Yeah.
Not always the case.
Doesn't always happen. Especially when products like, hey, we needed this thing yesterday. You kind of skip past that. But yeah, generally speaking, like there are ways to deal with that. And I think like just the general power you get from the tool is just incredible. And I'm a huge fan. So I said, like, I was going to give you a gotcha. I really feel like the biggest gotcha is like deep relationship traversal is like not quite there yet. And so I would love if someone has a different experience. They're more knowledgeable in this than I am. I've done a lot of research on this and I've really struggled. Maybe I'm just trying to construct like queries that are way too complex for the query builder. But I'd love to be able to say like, this object 3 levels deep is a relation that belongs to this other object over here. And like, you can do things. When I do a lot of personal projects, I like to leverage database relationships as a form of very basic authorization, sort of authorization by association, as a means to like control what people see and do, versus like something more complex like RBAC or ABAC. So I struggle with that model and with Prisma to keep it in the queries and not have to do these transient objects that you're interacting with in JavaScript. And that's time, that's kind of it for me. I wanted to keep this really simple, really basic, and really just like see what the interest is here, maybe afterwards from people, what they've seen or done or learned. It's such a huge and impressive library and like tool set even, that I feel like myself, even though I've been using it for 4 or 5 months now, barely scratched the surface of what it is and what it can do. And I'm really excited to like continue deepening this journey I'm on with Prisma and like find out where more powerful feature sets are and leverage them. So with that, I will toss it back over to you, Will.